The air in Savannah that August afternoon felt like it had been boiled. Heavy, suffocating. The kind of heat that presses down on your spine until your thoughts feel slow, syrup thick, and in the center of it all stood Bessie, hands bound, knees locked, chin raised, refusing to let the weight of 100 staring eyes push her into the dirt. She was 23, born free, educated, loved, a daughter, a friend, a neighbor, someone who laughed loudly and believed the world ran forward, not backward. But none of that mattered here. Not on the auction block. Not in 1851 Georgia. The crowd jostled, murmuring, appraising her like she was machinery. A pair of men debated whether her shoulders looked strong enough for field work. Another wondered out loud if she could sew. Someone else, older, drunker, just stared at her silently with a smile that curdled her stomach. But one man didn't murmur. He didn't bargain. He didn't joke. Colonel Richard Thornton stood straight and still at the front of the crowd, in a spotless white linen suit that didn't show a single bead of sweat. 52 years old, hair silvering at the temples, posture rigid from either vanity or a lifetime of command. His eyes tracked her movements with the cold calculation of a hunter, selecting a prize. He wasn't guessing at her worth, he was deciding it. The auctioneer slapped his cane against the platform, calling for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, you won't find another like this one today. Healthy, literate, freeborn well, formerly freeborn." The crowd chuckled. Bessie swallowed hard. Her parents had warned her that slave catchers were getting bolder, using forged papers and lies to disappear free black people into the South. But she never thought she'd be one of them. Never thought she'd wake up in chains with her mother screaming her name from a dock as strangers dragged her toward a ship. The bidding began. It rose fast. Too fast. People gasped. Even the auctioneer blinked. And every time someone raised a hand, Colonel Thornton raised his hand higher. He didn't flinch when the price passed $1,000. Didn't blink when it hit $1,500. Kept going until he stood alone at $2,000, enough to buy a small house in Philadelphia. Enough to buy 5 skilled laborers. Enough that everyone on that dock understood exactly what he intended. The gavel fell, and just like that, Bessie's future was sold to a man whose face she already knew she would hate. The trip to Thornton Grove lasted 3 days. 3 long days of sweat, dust, silence, and staring out at fields that seemed endless. The wagon rattled over dirt roads that carved themselves through forests and swamps and wide open plains. Bessie didn't cry. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she couldn't afford to let fear settle inside her. Fear was a weight, and she needed her mind light, sharp, alive. The other enslaved people barely spoke. Their silence told her more than words ever could. People who had learned to make themselves small so terrible things could pass over them. People who had forgotten what choice felt like. When the wagon turned a bend and Thornton Grove came into view, Bessie's breath caught. Hundreds of acres of cotton fields rolled out like a white ocean. Small wooden cabins lined the workers' quarters. Smoke curled from chimneys. Children ran barefoot between patches of dirt. And above it all, sitting like a smug king on a hilltop, was the main house, white columns, perfect symmetry. Shutters painted a deep hunter green. The place was beautiful, and that made it worse. Beauty like that was always built on broken backs. As Bessie stepped off the wagon, a woman approached her mid-40s, skin weathered from years under the sun, hair streaked with gray. Her name was Martha, and she moved with a kind of quiet precision, like someone who had learned to survive by avoiding notice. "Come with me," Martha whispered. "Keep your head down. Don't speak unless spoken to." Bessie nodded but didn't lower her head. She followed Martha into the house, through a foyer filled with polished floors and oil lamps that wouldn't have existed without forced labor, past a grand staircase, into a smaller, quieter room where the air felt 10 degrees cooler and the curtains filtered the sunlight into soft gold. And then the colonel entered. His boots clicked on the floor like a metronome of authority. He circled Bessie slowly, hands behind his back, studying her like a creature he intended to tame. "You're different," he said, voice smooth as tobacco smoke. "Educated. I can always tell." Bessie said nothing. "That will be corrected. Names, history, Letters, none of that matters here. You exist now for one purpose. A beat of silence stretched. Tight. Metallic. You will give me 20 children. Bessie felt her stomach drop. 20. As if they were livestock. As if she were a breeding mare. My line must continue, he added, as though this explained everything. You will give me what I require, and you will begin tonight. Her vision blurred for a moment, rage or shock or both, but her face stayed still. Martha didn't look up, didn't move, didn't breathe. Take her upstairs, the colonel ordered, and make sure she's prepared. The room was small but clean enough to make Bessie uneasy. There was a bed with a thin quilt, a small wash basin, a single mirror. This was Clarara's room, Martha said softly. The last one he chose for. This. She hesitated. She died in childbirth. He sold the children. Sold them. The air in the room seemed to tilt sideways. Bessie stepped to the window and looked out over the plantation. Smoke from cook fires drifted into the sky. Faint singing floated up the same spirituals her mother used to hum while sewing. That's when the decision hit her with the clarity of a lightning strike. She would not break. She would not submit. She would not survive quietly. If she was going to live through this, she would do it on her own terms, and she would take the entire system down with her. Martha left her to bathe. Bessie scrubbed the grime from her skin with shaking hands. Not because she wanted to be presentable for the colonel, but because cleaning herself reminded her she was human. A person, a mind, a will. She refused to let him wash that away. The hour passed, and then his footsteps came. Slow, heavy, confident. The door opened without a knock. Colonel Thornton stepped in wearing a burgundy smoking jacket, holding a glass of whiskey. His eyes swept her from head to toe, marked her, claimed her. Good, he murmured. You understand your position. Bessie did not move. He gestured toward the thin nightgown folded neatly on the bed. Put it on. No. The word dropped between them like a stone breaking the surface of still water. The colonel blinked. What did you say? I said no. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. Nothing in her face betrayed the fear pounding through her ribs. Colonel Thornton set his glass down slowly. Property does not refuse orders. Then you'll have to take what you want by force, Bessie said, her voice steady. And if you do, I want you to understand something. You will never own my consent. The colonel's jaw tightened. Consent? He spat. You dare lecture me about consent? In my house? In my law? Bessie lifted her chin. You bought my body, Colonel. Not my will. Not my mind. Not my dignity. He lunged. His hand closed around her throat, squeezing not just to hurt but to terrify, to reclaim dominance, to remind her that in his world, resistance wasn't defiance. It was suicide. Bessie didn't fight, didn't flail, didn't give him the satisfaction of fear. Do it, she whispered. Prove you're the monster I already know you are. Something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, confusion, maybe even shame. He released her, stepped back, took a long, shaking breath. You have 1 week, he said finally. 1 week to accept your place. After that, every act of disobedience will be punished not just for you, but for the others. Their suffering will be on your conscience. He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the mirror. Bessie collapsed onto the bed the moment his footsteps faded. Her whole body trembled not from fear, but from the magnitude of what she had just done. She had survived the first night, but the war had just begun. Minutes later, Martha slipped inside. Child, what did you do? The whole house heard him shouting. Bessie wiped a tear from her cheek she didn't remember shedding. I told him no. Martha stared at her. No one tells him no. I did. And what will you do now? Whatever it takes, Bessie whispered. Because if I let him define my worth tonight, I'll never reclaim it. And just like that, the first spark of rebellion ignited. A spark that would turn into fire. A fire that would swallow the plantation whole. The sun rose the next morning over Thornton Grove like nothing had changed. Birds chirped, cotton leaves rustled. Overseers barked orders across the fields. But inside the main house, Tension clung to the walls like humidity. Doors closed more softly. Servants stepped more lightly. Everyone felt it that a line had been crossed the night before. Bessie felt it too. She hadn't slept. Her throat still throbbed where the colonel's fingers had gripped her. But the bruises weren't the part that worried her, it was his threat. 1 week, 7 days, and if she refused again, others would suffer. That was the thing about men like Colonel Thornton. Cruelty wasn't just a tool, it was a language, and he spoke it fluently. At dawn, Martha came into the room with a basin of water and a cloth. "He's gone to the fields," she whispered, checking the hallway before closing the door. "Best keep to the kitchen today. Safer there." Bessie nodded, but her mind was already moving ahead. She didn't have time to be safe. She had 7 days to dismantle a man who believed himself untouchable. 7 days to learn his patterns. 7 days to find his weaknesses. 7 days to strike. The kitchen was a world of its own, steaming pots, clattering pans, the rhythm of hands chopping, kneading, stirring. It smelled of cornbread and wood smoke. But beneath the noise and heat, it was also where the quiet conversations happened. Secrets lived here, tucked between spoonfuls and side glances. Martha handed Bessie a basket of greens to wash. "Keep your ears open," she murmured. "Everyone talks in the kitchen." And they did. Cooks whispered about the colonel's debts. A boy delivering flour mentioned a banker who'd visited 2 months ago looking furious. A field hand limped in for water, muttering about how the overseer Pike had been pocketing money meant for supplies. Piece by piece, a picture formed. The plantation wasn't a fortress. It was a house with cracks. By midday, Bessie had cataloged more information than most people gathered in years. She watched who came and went from the house, who avoided which rooms, which doors stayed locked, where the keys hung, what time meals were served. When the colonel drank, how much he drank. Information wasn't just power. Information was escape. At dinner, she moved silently around the table, serving food to the colonel and his visiting neighbors. Their conversation drifted between cotton prices, hunting trips, and gossip about a nearby plantation owner whose daughter had scandalously eloped with a schoolteacher. Then something slipped. A man named Douglas chuckled as he cut into his pork. "Richard, I heard you told the bank you'd have triple yield this year. Ambitious, aren't we?" The colonel stiffened, his fork pausing midair. "Yields will be sufficient." "Sufficient?" Douglas smirked. "Half the county says your fields are worn out. Soil's too tired. But I suppose you'll adjust the books like you always do." Something icy slid down Bessie's spine. Adjust the books. The colonel's eyes flickered to her for half a second, just long enough to betray something. Suspicion? Fear? Paranoia? When the men left the dining room for cigars, Bessie cleared plates with shaking hands. He was hiding something. Something big. Something that could ruin him. 3 days passed. 3 days of watching. Listening. Mapping. 3 days where the colonel avoided her but never stopped watching her. She felt his gaze everywhere, through the hallways, through the walls, like he could reach inside her skull and pry out her thoughts. But he couldn't, because she was getting smarter, more patient, more dangerous. On the 4th day, the Reverend arrived. Reverend Thomas Blackwell was younger than Bessie expected, mid-30s, sharp-featured, with a gentle voice and eyes that saw too much. To the colonel, he was a well-connected minister with elite friends. To the enslaved people in Georgia, he was something else entirely, a ghost in plain sight. A man who preached in the morning and smuggled families north by night. Bessie served him wine quietly, but the moment their eyes met, she felt it recognition, not of her face, but of her fear. Abolitionists could smell desperation the way farmers smelled rain. The Reverend lifted his glass. "Colonel Thornton, I must congratulate you on your recent acquisition. I hear she cost a pretty penny." Bessie froze. The colonel cleared his throat. "She is adequate." "Adequate," the Reverend murmured. "Word in Savannah is she might have been freeborn. That would be a legal mess if anyone proved it." The room went silent. The colonel gripped his glass so tightly it looked like it might crack. "Rumors," he said. "Of course," the Reverend replied mildly. Rumors often are. But sometimes, just sometimes, they come from the truth. Later, when the men retreated to the study to smoke cigars, the Reverend slipped past Bessie on the way to his carriage. He touched her arm lightly. "Walk with me," he whispered. Outside, night air hung heavy and alive with insects. "You are not supposed to be here," the Reverend said quietly. "Your parents are searching for you." Bessie's breath caught. Something sharp and bright bloomed in her chest. "They're alive," she whispered. "Alive and fighting. They have affidavits, witnesses, but Georgia isn't eager to release stolen freedom." Bessie closed her eyes. For a moment, she felt the echo of her mother's hand, her father's laugh. "What do I do?" she asked. The Reverend hesitated. "I can take you north tonight. There is a safe house 2 miles from here. A wagon at dawn. Papers waiting in Savannah." Bessie looked back at the house, at the windows glowing with lamplight, at the distant quarters full of people who would still wake up enslaved tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. "If I run," she said, "he'll punish them." "He will punish them anyway," the Reverend replied. "That is what men like him do." "But if I stay," she whispered, "I can destroy him." The Reverend blinked, startled. "Destroy?" "He's cooking his books, stealing labor, selling people he doesn't own. If the creditors saw proof, real proof, they'd pull this place apart." The Reverend stepped closer. "And how would you get such proof?" "He keeps the ledgers in his study." The Reverend stared at her for a long moment, then exhaled. "You are either a visionary or catastrophically reckless." "Maybe both," Bessie said. He didn't argue. Recklessness had changed history before. The plan formed faster than fear could catch up. 3 days to gather evidence. 3 days to slip into the study during field inspections. 3 days to copy everything the Colonel never dreamed she could read. 3 days to decide whether she believed she would survive this. She started small. A missing key. A loosened hinge. A servant's schedule memorized. A drawer left open by accident, or so it seemed. She moved through the house with quiet confidence, the way a cat moves through shadows. She wasn't scared anymore. She was hunting. On the 6th night, she slipped into the Colonel's study. Candle, burning low. Ledger open. Pencil in hand. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might give her away. And what she saw, the plantation wasn't just failing, it was rotting. Forged bills of sale. Fake cotton yields. Double-sold enslaved workers. A web of fraud that stretched across counties. She copied until her fingers cramped, until her eyes blurred, until she wasn't sure if the shaking in her hands was exhaustion or rage. When a floorboard creaked behind her, she blew out the candle and pressed herself into the dark. "Please don't be him. Please don't be him." The door opened. A silhouette entered. A woman's silhouette. "Child," Martha whispered. "What in God's name are you doing?" Bessie held up the pages. Martha squinted, then gasped softly. She didn't understand every word, but she understood numbers, and she understood danger. "Lord, have mercy," she breathed. "He really is a thief. Help me hide these," Bessie whispered. "The Reverend comes back tomorrow." Martha hesitated, not out of fear, but out of awe. "You're going to burn this whole place down," she whispered. Bessie nodded slowly. "That's the idea." Martha tucked the papers inside her apron, and for the first time since Bessie arrived, Martha looked at her not with worry, but with hope. Outside, the sky was beginning to pale with dawn. Bessie's time was almost up. The Colonel had given her 1 week to submit. Tonight was the 7th night, and she had no intention of bending. She didn't plan to survive quietly. She planned to survive loudly. She planned to survive dangerously. She planned to destroy the man who believed he owned her. And by the time the sun rose again, the first domino would fall. The plantation just didn't know it yet. Night 7 arrived, swollen with heat, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Clouds of gnats hovered over the fields. The frogs in the swamp croaked endlessly, a kind of droning omen. And inside Thornton Grove's main house, a storm was gathering quiet, invisible, and about to break over every man who ever believed that human beings were property. Bessie wasn't afraid. She thought she would be. thought her knees would shake, her breath would hitch, her voice turned small. But standing outside the colonel's study door at 8 p.m., she felt strangely steady, as if her body already knew the outcome. Even if her mind didn't. The house was still. Only the distant crackle of lanterns and the soft hum of field songs drifted through the open windows. Behind that door waited a man who believed he owned her soul. He was about to learn otherwise. Bessie knocked once. A hard voice said, "Enter." She stepped inside. The colonel stood behind his desk with the confidence of someone who had never lost anything in his life, not money, not power, not a battle of wills. His burgundy smoking jacket hung open. His face was clean-shaven but taut with irritation. "You've kept me waiting," he said. Not a promising start. Bessie didn't answer. He gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit." She remained standing. The colonel stiffened. "I see our week apart has not taught you humility." "No," Bessie said softly. "It taught me truth." He blinked, taken aback by the calm in her voice. "And what truth is that?" he asked, folding his arms. "That you're not the man you pretend to be," she said. "Not powerful, not noble, not respected, just a coward hiding behind a failing empire." His face flushed dark. "You will speak with respect," he hissed. "I will speak with honesty," Bessie corrected. "You're a fraud, Colonel Thornton. In every way." For a moment, silence fell like a guillotine blade. Then the colonel let out a low, mocking laugh. "You think you intimidate me? You think defiance gives you leverage? You are a woman I purchased. Nothing more." "Well," Bessie said, "your creditors will disagree tomorrow." The colonel stopped laughing. Something primal flickered across his face. "What did you say?" "I said," Bessie repeated slowly. "Your creditors. The ones you lied to, cheated, stole from." His eyes narrowed. "You know nothing of my business." "I know everything," she said. "Your forged bills of sale, your fake cotton yields, your double selling of enslaved people, your debts that drown this entire plantation." His breath caught, and in that single inhale, she saw it, the fear, the first crack. "How?" he rasped. "How could you know that?" "You told me," Bessie said simply. "Not with words, but with arrogance. Arrogance makes men careless." He lunged, but she had been expecting it. Her hand closed around the heavy brass candlestick she had hidden behind her back. As he grabbed for her arm, she swung clean, fast, brutal. The metal hit his temple with a sickening thud. The colonel stumbled back, blood blooming across his hairline. But he didn't fall. Oh no. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a pistol. "You stupid girl," he snarled. "I should have beaten the defiance out of you day one. You think you can bring down a man like me?" Bessie stepped backward toward the door, heart thundering. But she didn't run. "You can shoot me," she said, "but you cannot stop what's coming." He raised the pistol, but before he could fire, footsteps thundered behind Bessie. Martha burst into the room. "Stop!" she cried. "Sir, put that gun down." The colonel barked a bitter laugh. "You think I won't kill her?" "You kill her," Martha said, "and it won't matter." She already gave the papers to the Reverend. The colonel's eyes widened. A visible shudder ran through him. So that was it. The truth, the terror, the realization that power, real power, had slipped through his fingers. He swung the pistol toward Martha, but Bessie moved first. She charged him, slamming her shoulder into his chest. The gun fired a deafening blast that lit the room white for a split second, but the bullet struck the ceiling. The colonel dropped the pistol as he crashed backward over his desk. Bessie didn't wait. She grabbed Martha's hand. "Run." They tore through the hallway, past portraits of stern men whose wealth had been built on bondage, past servants who gasped as they passed, past the grand staircase. Outside, the Reverend's carriage waited, exactly as planned. "Go," Bessie shouted. The Reverend cracked the reins hard. The horses surged forward, hooves kicking up dust as the wheels jolted over the dirt road. Behind them, the house erupted. Shouts, lights, chaos. The plantation was waking up, and not for work, for war. They rode through the night like fugitives of justice, not fear. The Reverend's lantern swung wildly, illuminating flashes of cypress trees, Spanish moss, muddy ditches, and wild grass bending in the wind. "You got everything?" the Reverend panted. "Everything," Bessie said, her voice shaking not from fear but adrenaline. "Ledgers, receipts, fake bills, every lie he built this place on." "Good," the Reverend said, "because the banks will bury him by morning." Bessie looked back at the shrinking silhouette of Thornton Grove. "Let them," she whispered. But even as the carriage raced away, a distant glow flickered behind them. Not lanterns, not torches, flames. The plantation hadn't just fallen into legal ruin. Someone, maybe many someones, had set fire to the great house. It wouldn't survive the night. The colonel wouldn't survive the scandal. And his empire, built from chains, cruelty, and corruption, was being eaten alive by the very people he believed were powerless. They reached Savannah before dawn, slipping into the Reverend's safe house through a back alley. Inside, Bessie was handed forged papers, a small bag of coins, and a shawl. "You need to leave before noon," the Reverend said. "The steamship for Philadelphia embarks at 12:30. Authorities won't look for you up north yet." Bessie nodded, but her legs suddenly felt weak. The last week had been a storm inside her body: terror, rage, courage, exhaustion, and now that the danger was behind her, everything hit at once. Her hands trembled violently. Her breath shook. She leaned against the wall just to stay upright. Martha stepped in front of her, placing both hands on Bessie's cheeks. "You did it," Martha whispered. "Lord knows how, but you did it." Bessie swallowed hard. "I had to." "You didn't have to for us," Martha murmured. "But you did anyway." Bessie pulled her into a tight embrace. "I'll come back for you," she whispered. "Not tonight, not soon, but one day I will come back." Martha nodded into her shoulder. "We'll live for that day." The next hours moved like a dream. The ship, the docks, the rocking of the deck under her feet, the distant call of gulls, the city shrinking behind her, the ocean stretching ahead like a future she hadn't dared imagine. 3 weeks later, she walked off the ship into the arms of her mother and father. Her mother cried until her knees gave out. Her father held her like he would never let go again. Neighbors gathered, touching her shoulders, her hands, her hair, making sure she was real. Freedom felt too big to fit in her lungs, but Bessie filled them anyway. Because breathing freely was an act of rebellion too. She didn't stay quiet. Bessie spoke in churches, in meeting halls, in abolitionist gatherings that filled rooms with candlelight and righteous anger. Her voice was soft at first, trembling, but word spread quickly about the young woman stolen from freedom, sold to a monster, who fought back not with a knife but with knowledge. Knowledge that destroyed a plantation. Knowledge that led to arrest warrants and financial collapse. Knowledge that shone a light on how slavery wasn't just violence. It was organized theft. Of money, of lives, of futures. When she met Frederick Douglass, he clasped her hands and said, "Your story is an earthquake. Tremors like this move nations." Harriet Tubman embraced her like a sister who had made it home. Sojourner Truth listened with fierce eyes, then said, "Child, your spine is a pillar." Bessie kept speaking, kept writing, kept fighting. When the Civil War began, she worked with the Union Army helping build schools, teaching reading and arithmetic to newly freed families. She married a teacher named Samuel. They had children who grew up knowing books instead of chains. She lived long enough to see slavery abolished, long enough to hear President Lincoln's proclamation, long enough to stand in a crowd and weep as bells rang out across the city. And when young activists asked her, decades later, why she risked everything, she always answered the same way. Because silence is complicity, because saying nothing is surrender, because the system counted on our fear and I refused to give it power. Bessie died in 1889, surrounded by her family, her legacy secure, her story carried through generations. But that night on the plantation, the night she said no, the night she lit the fuse, the night she refused to let a monster reshape her humanity, that was the moment that changed everything. Her defiance didn't just save her. It cracked the foundation of a system built on suffering, and sometimes, all it takes to break a fortress is one woman who refuses to bow.